Hey, this is Ian, in with you in the Fight Back. And today I want to talk about the labor theory of value, which is probably the cornerstone of Marxist economics. Because when we Marxists say that workers are being exploited and that the capitalists are reaping from the labor of the workers, how exactly does that work out? What's the mechanism? Well, when we look at capital, when we look at the capitalist system in its totality, we know that the only way for business to stay in business is to expand, to continue to make profits and values. Because if a business remains stagnant, eventually they're likely to just go under because other businesses will outproduce them and just corner the market on them. So if a business is to produce, if it's to expand, if it's to gain profits and more values, the question becomes, where do those profits and values come from? How does a capitalist put more value upon the market? Well, they can always do various forms of speculation. They can undercut their competitors. But if all the capitalists do this, it's really not going to change too much. But there has to be a source. There has to be some commodity that creates value, that creates value and surplus value and ultimately profit. So what is that commodity? And we can say, and the Marxists do, is a special commodity that creates value is labor power. In a sense, not so much labor, because there are different types of labor. If you're a computer technician, that's different from being a construction worker. If you're a cashier, that's different from being a records keeper, in a sense. But all these things have something in common, and that is their ability to labor, their labor power. In a sense, the head and the hands. We all have that, or most of us do. And labor power is the source of value. And for labor power to enter circulation in the circuit of capital, the owner has to be free. He can't be a slave. Because if you're a slave, in a sense, your labor power is sold once and for all to the slave master, who exploits you. And in order for this labor power to work for you, the worker, you pretty much have nothing else to sell. You don't come from a wealthy background. You don't necessarily, have a ton of money in the bank that you can draw upon. No, the working class essentially has nothing to sell but its labor power. Head in its hands. And so the labor power has value because it can create more use values, more profit for the capitalist. But that brings up a very interesting question. Well, how is the value of labor power determined? Where does that? Well, it's the same thing as a regular commodity. For instance, this computer, the mouse, the shirt I'm wearing, my glasses. And the value of labor power is determined by the labor time necessary for the production and consequently also the reproduction of this special article. So says Marx. So what do I mean by that? Or what does Marx mean by that? What he's saying is the labor power is given the individual, the production of labor power consists in his reproduction of himself or his maintenance. For his maintenance, he requires a given quantity of means of subsistence. So we can say that the minimum limit of the value of labor power is determined by the value of the commodities without the daily supply of which the laborer cannot renew his vital energy, consequently by the value of those means of subsistence that are physically indispensable. So in a sense, pretty much, if you're a laborer, you need food, you need water, you probably need some form of housing, clothing, and if you have a family, you may need to provide for your husband or wife or children. And in a sense, that's the minimum of what you need. That is what determines the value of labor power. And if you think about it for a second, that's what the capitalist is taking into account when they're purchasing your labor power. What do you need essentially to produce and reproduce it? So if you look at it, you're just almost like any other commodity. What do you need to produce and reproduce, for instance, the shirt, the mirror in the background, or a bed or something. You're just an article. And you're turned into a commodity. Your labor power. You're not seen as a person. You're seen as someone who can labor. You're a commodity, or you have the possession of the commodity of labor power. And it just kind of shows you this dehumanization of capital, consequent not just with the exploitation, but with also the alienation. You're objectified. You're just seen as an object, something that can work. Now, let's say the value of labor power is $3. That is, of course, not necessarily true. We can use different figures, but for the purposes here. And let's say you work at a job for 12 hours, but in that time, you produce $6 worth of labor. Well, you're probably going to get, let's say, and your paycheck is $3. So, in 12 hours, you produce $6 of labor, of value. But your paycheck is only $3 because that is the value of your labor power. But the capitalist is going to pay you the check for $3 and is going to pocket the difference. In a sense, you're being exploited. Because when you produce more than you need for your subsistence, for the production and reproduction of your labor power, you're being exploited. That is surplus value. That is going to the hands of the capitalist. And what does the capitalist do with that surplus value? Well, they're going to use it to expand the business, perhaps. They may use it to update or to replace various forms of machinery. They may use it to hire more laborers, and they may just use it to buy a new yacht. You're being exploited. You're the source of value. You, the worker, not the capitalist. And that is pretty... And so, in those 6 hours that you use that produces your $3 for your subsistence, and then in the other 6 hours that produces the other $3 that is surplus value, well, you are making profit for the capitalist, but the capitalist may want more profit from you, so how can they do that? There are generally one of two ways. Number one, they can lengthen the workday, so you're producing more surplus value. For instance, instead of working 12 hours, you could work 14. So you're producing yet more money. Or the capitalist can as machinery improves, you can produce more value in that 12 hours. So let's say you're just working 12 hours, and instead of in that 12 hours you're producing $6, you're producing $12. So in a sense, it's only taking you 3 hours to reproduce your value, and in the other 9 hours, you're reproducing surplus value that goes to the capitalist. This is what Marx says when he talks about absolute and relative surplus value. For instance, absolute would be lengthening the working day, and relative would be improving the machinery you use, more efficient. A quick point to note here is that the minimum subsistence for a laborer can depend on various factors, depending on the culture, the history, the level of struggle. So because through various workers' struggles, at one point the average labor day in, say, the United States or Great Britain was probably something like 16 hours, but through the struggles of trade unions and workers' political parties, that in general the labor day is much less than that, in general. And this is, of course, not always so, and capital wants to push the labor day back up there. And of course, in, say, a more third world country, the labor day is generally longer, but through struggle, that can be lengthened. And due to the level of development of society, the subsistence can be different. You may actually need, say, you may need a larger wage depending on where you live, because you may need to purchase some form of transportation, a vehicle of some sort, or whatnot. So, and there's a lot more that can be said. Also, to increase surplus value, the capitalist may just intensify your work, not just by introducing more machinery, but, say, through speed up. Say you're on an assembly line, and instead of, say, screwing 5 screws a minute, you have to do 20. so you can produce more value. And this is essentially saying that what Marx gets at here through this whole labor theory of value is your labor, your hands, your head, the very thing that makes you human, your ability to labor to create great works of art, great buildings, right, and all this. Your labor is belonging to someone else who's exploiting you. When you're working from 9 to 5 or 9 to 9, however long it is, your labor doesn't belong to you. It belongs to someone else. And they're using it to increase their profit, their value. And a struggle goes on between this. Workers resist speed-ups. They may resist the introduction of new machinery because it's just going to exploit them more. They may not, but the workers may resist the lengthening of the day. They should. And what we Marxists recognize that we need to have a surplus to help society develop, to provide for all the needs. The question isn't necessarily do we need a surplus. The question is who controls the surplus. And we Marxists say that workers should control it. We don't need this capitalist. We don't need them there. We can just get rid of them and we can produce for ourselves. Instead of building new yachts for billionaires, we can build new schools. Instead of providing for wars that only benefit the bourgeoisie, we can provide better education, homes for the elderly, that we can make sure everyone has a decent life to live. And Marxists say that all labor originates with the laborers, with the working class. The capitalists may at one point introduce certain machinery. They may come up with some invention, but who's producing that? Who's reproducing that? It's the working class. So the saying is, and this was from France, is the boss needs you, the workers. The workers don't need the boss. So I urge you to help make that a reality. So this is Ina.